Bob scoffed at superstition. Ghosts, demons, tarot cards, all nonsense. He believed in facts, in logic, in the tangible. The supernatural was for the gullible, not for a practical man like him. He took pride in his rationality, his firm grip on reality. The unseen world held no allure, sparked no curiosity. He lived in the light of day, where shadows couldn't touch him. One rainy Tuesday evening, his friend Mark suggested they visit a fortune teller. Bob laughed, almost choking on his beer. "You're kidding, right?" he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Mark, always up for the unconventional, insisted it would be harmless fun. Bob reluctantly agreed, his skepticism a shield against the absurdity of it all. He wouldn't let some charlatan with a deck of cards rattle his well-ordered world. He'd humor Mark, prove him wrong, and have a good laugh about it later. The fortune teller's room was dim, lit by a single flickering candle. Incense choked the air, thick and cloying. Bob shifted uncomfortably, his skepticism growing with every passing second. The woman herself was an unsettling figure, draped in layers of colorful scarves and beads. Her eyes, dark and intense, seemed to bore into Bob, reading his thoughts. She shuffled the tarot cards, her long, bony fingers moving with an unnerving grace. "Choose a card," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. Bob hesitated, then picked a card at random. He flipped it over. "The devil." The woman's eyes widened. "Beware," she whispered, her gaze fixed on Bob. "The devil brings chaos. He tempts with promises of power, of freedom, but his gifts are a curse." Bob tried to laugh it off, but a shiver ran down his spine. He left the fortune teller's room feeling uneasy. The image of the devil card seared into his mind. The next morning, Bob woke up feeling unsettled. He tried to shake off the memory of the fortune teller's words, but the devil card lingered in his thoughts. At work, things started to feel off. His usually reliable computer crashed repeatedly, erasing hours of work. Colleagues he'd known for years seemed to avoid his gaze. Whispers followed him down the hallway, hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when he turned around. His boss, normally jovial and encouraging, became distant and critical, finding fault with everything Bob did. The office, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt oppressive, suffocating. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down on him, fueling his paranoia. His once unshakable confidence crumbled, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. The pressure, both real and imagined, became unbearable. Bob, normally a model of composure, found himself snapping at colleagues, his patience worn thin. The joy had been sucked out of his work, replaced by a constant, low-level hum of anxiety. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating meeting where his every idea was met with icy silence, Bob snapped. He marched into his boss's office, resignation letter already written, and quit. He walked out of the office that day, feeling a strange mix of relief and terror. Relief at escaping the suffocating atmosphere, terror at the uncertainty that lay ahead. He'd abandoned his career, his livelihood on a whim, driven by a fear he couldn't explain. He tried to convince himself it was for the best, that he could start over, but the devil's grin mocked him from the recesses of his mind. The following year was the hardest of Bob's life. He drained his savings, unable to find another job. Every interview seemed to end the same way, with polite smiles and vague promises that never materialized. His confidence, once a suit of armor, lay shattered, leaving him vulnerable and afraid. He withdrew from friends and family, isolating himself in his small, increasingly shabby apartment. The world outside his window moved on without him, a constant reminder of his isolation. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, haunted by the consequences of his impulsive decision. He was living the fortune teller's prophecy, consumed by the chaos he'd invited into his life. Sleep offered no escape, his nights plagued by vivid dreams of the devil card, its leering image burned into his eyelids. One night, in the depths of his despair, Bob sat staring at the devil card. He'd kept it tucked away in his wallet, a morbid souvenir of the day his life had begun to unravel. The devil's eyes seemed to glint in the dim light, mocking his pain. The devil, the fortune teller had warned, offered false promises, his gifts a poisoned chalice. Bob finally understood. The devil hadn't forced his hand, hadn't dragged him down into the abyss. He'd offered a temptation, a whisper of doubt, and Bob, in his fear, had surrendered. He'd allowed the card, the prophecy, to take root in his mind, to poison his thoughts and dictate his actions. He'd given away his power, his agency, and in doing so, had become a prisoner in his own life. Bob's story is a cautionary tale. It serves as a chilling reminder that the true danger of the supernatural doesn't lie in Ouija boards or tarot cards, but in the power we give them. It's a warning to those who seek answers in the unknown, who, like Bob, scoff at superstition yet find themselves drawn to its allure. The devil card, like all symbols of the occult, is merely a conduit. It's a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, our hidden desires. It's up to us to decide whether we'll let those reflections define us, control us. Hold on to your logic, your reason, your grip on reality. Value what you have, cherish the light, and don't let the shadows lead you astray. The darkness thrives on fear, on doubt. Don't give it the satisfaction.